I pulled into the Mammoth Hot Springs Ranger Station parking lot with my windows down, letting the cool mountain air fill the cab of my truck. The drive from Minneapolis had taken 2 days, and every mile west had felt like putting more distance between me and the mess I'd left behind. The Yellowstone job posting had seemed like exactly what I needed: isolated, purposeful, a chance to help people while staying away from crowds and complications. The parking lot was mostly empty at 7:00 in the morning, just a few government vehicles with Park Service logos. I grabbed my paperwork from the passenger seat and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Clean shave, short hair, the kind of presentation that said I could follow orders and wouldn't cause problems. That was the goal anyway. The ranger station was a low stone building that looked like it had been here since the park's founding. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed over a reception area with wooden benches and wildlife posters covering the walls. A woman in her mid-40s stood behind the counter, auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her Park Service uniform was pressed and professional, but she had the kind of weathered hands that said she'd spent real time outdoors. Bruce Rue. She looked up from a stack of paperwork as I approached. "Yes, ma'am, reporting for orientation." Summer Bailey, park supervisor. Her handshake was firm, businesslike. "Welcome to Yellowstone. How was the drive?" "Long but good. Beautiful country out here. It is that." She pulled a manila folder from beneath the counter. "We'll get you processed and out on patrol." "Coffee? I'm fine, thank you." Summer opened the folder and spread several documents across the counter. Standard employment forms, emergency contact information, radio protocols. Nothing unexpected until she pulled out a single sheet of white paper with 6 numbered items typed in courier font. "These are our local protocols," she said, sliding the paper toward me. "Every ranger working this section needs to follow them exactly." I picked up the sheet and read the first rule. "If you encounter a bear walking backward, do not make eye contact. Continue your patrol route without stopping or alerting dispatch." The words didn't make sense together. I read it again, then looked up at Summer, walking backward. "That's correct." I scanned the rest of the list. Rule 2 involved offering water to after-hours visitors, but not answering their questions. Rule 3 required specific patrol timing after sunset. Rule 4 stated that if I heard a child crying in the wilderness, I should not investigate under any circumstances. Rule 5 involved barricading myself inside the nearest station if I heard 3 wolf howls in sequence. Rule 6 instructed me to drive away immediately if I encountered 3 or more people sitting together outdoors. "Ma'am, I have to ask, is this some kind of new employee hazing?" Summer's expression didn't change. No smile, no acknowledgement that the rules were unusual. These protocols have been developed over years of experience in this area. They're not negotiable, but a bear walking backward. Wildlife behavior can be unpredictable, especially in thermal areas where the ground affects their movement patterns. Her tone stayed level, professional. "The important thing is following the protocols exactly as written." I looked at the paper again. The rules read like something from a horror movie, not a federal employment manual. But Summer's demeanor suggested she was completely serious and I needed this job. After everything that had happened overseas, after months of therapy and applications and rejections, Yellowstone represented a fresh start. I wasn't about to blow it by questioning my supervisor on day 1. "Understood. Follow the protocols." "Exactly." Summer pulled a radio from a charging station and handed it to me. "Channel 7 for routine communication. Channel 3 for emergencies. Your patrol vehicle is the white Ford Explorer with unit number 12. She slid a set of keys across the counter. "Today you'll be covering the Lamar Valley route. Familiarize yourself with the roads and visibility points." I clipped the radio to my belt and pocketed the keys. The weight of them felt good. Official. What about backup? Other rangers in the area. Your solo patrol for now. Radio check every 2 hours. Summer gathered the employment paperwork. "Any other questions?" Several dozen, actually, but I could hear the finality in her voice. "No, ma'am, I'll get started." "Bruce." She looked at me directly for the first time since I'd arrived. "The protocols exist for good reasons. Follow them exactly." The parking lot was brighter when I stepped outside, though that might have been relief at escaping the fluorescent lights. Unit 12 was easy to spot. A white Explorer with government plates and a light bar on the roof. The interior smelled like coffee and stale air freshener, with a laptop mounted between the seats and a clipboard of forms secured to the dashboard. I adjusted the seat and mirrors, then spread a park map across the steering wheel. The Lamar Valley route covered the northeast section, a loop that would take me through some of the most remote parts of the park, perfect for getting my bearings without dealing with tourist crowds. The radio crackled as I started the engine. "Unit 12, radio check." I picked up the handset. "Unit 12 operational. Copy, have a good patrol." The drive out of Mammoth Hot Springs took me through terrain that shifted from high desert to mountain forest. Traffic was light. A few early morning photographers heading toward wildlife viewing areas. I passed several other park service vehicles, the drivers raising their hands in acknowledgement, normal professional interactions that helped settle the unease from summer's briefing. The Lamar Valley opened up ahead of me like something from a nature documentary. Rolling grasslands stretched between forested ridges, with the Lamar River winding through the middle distance. Bison grazed in scattered groups, and I spotted what might have been elk near a distant tree line. This was why I'd wanted the job. Space wildlife, the kind of natural beauty that made human problems seem manageable. I drove slowly, checking turnouts and trail access points. The radio stayed quiet except for occasional chatter from other units. Around 10:00, I pulled over at a scenic overlook to update my patrol log. The valley spread out below me, peaceful and vast. Maybe the weird rules were just summer's way of testing how well I'd follow orders. Military experience had taught me that every organization had its quirks and unofficial procedures. 3 hours into patrol, I was driving a winding section of road that followed the valley's northern edge. Dense forest pressed close to the asphalt with occasional glimpses of meadows between the trees. I'd settled into the rhythm of the route, enjoying the solitude and the steady background chatter on the radio. That's when I saw the bear. It was moving down a steep hillside about 50 yards from the road, a massive grizzly with dark brown fur, but something was wrong with its movement. Instead of walking normally down the slope, it was backing down, rear legs first, front paws feeling for purchase behind it. The motion looked deliberate, controlled, like it was performing some kind of elaborate dance. I slowed the vehicle, trying to process what I was seeing. Bears could walk backward. I'd seen it in zoos when they were playing or avoiding something, but this looked different, purposeful. The grizzly moved with careful precision, never looking where it was going, as if the backward motion was completely natural. The first rule flashed through my memory. If you encounter a bear walking backward, do not make eye contact. I forced myself to look away from the bear and focus on the road ahead, but my peripheral vision caught its movement, and something about the animal's posture made my skin crawl. It wasn't just walking backward. It was watching the road, watching me. I pressed the accelerator, increasing speed without being obvious about it. The bear continued its strange descent, and I caught a glimpse of its head turning to track my vehicle. Its eyes seemed too focused, too aware. Most wild animals would have fled at the sound of the engine, but this one kept moving backward down the slope like my presence was exactly what it expected. The road curved away from the hillside, blocking my view of the bear. I checked the rear view mirror, but couldn't see anything through the trees. My hands had tightened on the steering wheel without me realizing it, and I made a conscious effort to relax my grip. Just a bear with odd behavior. Maybe it had been injured and couldn't turn around normally. Maybe the thermal activity in the ground was affecting its movement. There had to be a logical explanation, even if Summer's rule had made the encounter feel significant. I continued the patrol route. But the image of the backward walking grizzly stayed with me. The way it had watched my vehicle, the deliberate nature of its movement, the coincidence of encountering exactly the scenario described in Rule 1 on my first day. Nothing about it felt random. The radio stayed quiet for the rest of my shift. I completed the loop through Lamar Valley, checked in with dispatch at the required intervals, and filed a routine patrol report that made no mention of unusual wildlife behavior. By the time I returned Unit 12 to the motor pool, the sun was setting behind the mountains. Employee housing was a cluster of small cabins about a mile from the main administrative area. My assigned quarters turned out to be a studio apartment with basic furnishings and a kitchenette, standard government housing, functional but depressing. I'd lived in worse places overseas. I heated a can of soup and sat at the small table with Summer's list of protocols. Reading them again didn't make them any less strange. Rule 4 bothered me the most. Not investigating a crying child went against every instinct I had. Military training had drilled into me the importance of protecting civilians, especially kids, but the rule was explicit. Do not investigate under any circumstances. What kind of place was this where helping a lost child was prohibited? What had happened here to make such rules necessary? I folded the paper and slipped it into my wallet next to my military ID. Tomorrow would bring more patrol shifts, more opportunities to figure out what I'd gotten myself into. Maybe I'd encounter other rangers who could explain the unofficial culture. Maybe Summer would be more forthcoming once I'd proven myself reliable. Outside my window, the mountains were black silhouettes against a star-filled sky. Yellowstone was beautiful, peaceful, exactly what I'd hoped for when I'd applied for the position. But the backward walking bear had left me with questions that wouldn't go away. And Summer's serious demeanor when discussing the protocols suggested they weren't jokes or hazing rituals. I set my alarm for 6:30 and turned off the lights. Whatever was going on here, I'd figure it out eventually. I just had to follow the rules, do my job, and give it time. How complicated could it be? I pulled out of the Towerfall Ranger Station parking lot with my headlights cutting through the mountain darkness. the radio silence more noticeable now that normal park operations had ended for the day. Rule 3 had been specific about after-hours patrol timing. Begin exactly 2 hours after sunset. Maintain standard route coverage. Report any anomalies immediately. The dashboard clock read 9:17 p.m., putting me right on schedule. The Grand Loop Road stretched ahead in the cone of my headlights, asphalt disappearing into blackness between walls of lodgepole pine. During the day, this section offered scenic overlooks and wildlife viewing opportunities. At night, it felt like driving through a tunnel with no end. I kept my speed steady, checking mile markers against the patrol checklist Summer had provided. 23 miles of road to cover with scheduled stops at 4 designated points. My radio crackled with static, then cleared. No other units were operating in this sector after dark. Standard procedure for remote areas where backup wasn't readily available. The isolation should have been peaceful, but something about the complete silence made me hyper-aware of every shadow that moved beyond my headlights. 20 minutes into the drive, I heard it, crying, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere in the tree line to my right. A child's voice, high and desperate, calling for help. The sound carried clearly through my open window, rising and falling with genuine panic. I slowed the vehicle, then stopped completely, engine idling while I strained to listen. The crying continued, definitely a young voice, maybe a girl. Lost hikers weren't uncommon in Yellowstone, and families sometimes underestimated how quickly darkness could disorient even experienced outdoors people. Every instinct I had screamed that someone needed help, but Rule 4 was burned into my memory. If you hear a child crying in the wilderness, do not investigate under any circumstances. The crying grew closer, moving through the trees toward the road. I could make out words now, help me, and I can't find them. Repeated over and over with increasing desperation. My hand moved toward the radio to call for backup, then stopped. The rule hadn't mentioned calling for help, only not investigating personally. A small figure emerged from the tree line about 30 yards ahead of my vehicle. A girl, maybe 8 years old, wearing a light blue jacket and jeans. She ran toward my truck with her arms outstretched, tears reflecting in my headlights. Everything about her posture and movement screamed genuine terror. Please help me, she called out as she approached the driver's side. I can't find my parents. They were camping and I got lost. I rolled up my window, leaving only a small gap. The girl pressed her face close to the glass, and I could see she'd been crying for a while. Red eyes, streaks, the kind of exhaustion that comes from hours of fear. She looked exactly like every missing child case I'd seen during my military service. Exactly like the kind of situation where hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. Please, she whispered through the gap. I've been walking for hours. I'm so scared. My throat felt tight. Everything in my training said to protect civilians, especially children. Everything in my gut said this girl needed immediate help. But Summer's voice echoed in my memory. Follow the protocols. Exactly. I can't help you, I said through the window. The words came out harsher than I'd intended. I'm sorry. The girl's expression shifted from hope to confusion to something that might have been disappointment. But I'm lost. I need help finding my parents. I can't help you, I repeated, then put the vehicle in drive. As I pulled away, I watched the girl in my rear-view mirror. She stood in the road for a moment, then began running after my vehicle. At first, her pace seemed normal for a frightened child trying to catch up. But as I increased speed, she kept pace. 20 mph, then 30, then 40. The girl was running behind my truck at 40 mph without any sign of effort or strain. I pressed the accelerator harder, watching the speedometer climb. The girl maintained her distance, arms pumping, legs moving in perfect rhythm. Her face showed no exhaustion, no breathlessness. She ran like an Olympic sprinter, but with the casual ease of someone taking a morning jog. For nearly a mile, she kept pace with my vehicle. Then, as abruptly as she'd started running, she simply wasn't there anymore. My rearview mirror showed empty road illuminated by my tail lights. I drove the remaining patrol route on autopilot, checking required stops without really seeing them. The image of the running girl played on repeat in my mind. The impossible speed, the effortless stride, the way she'd simply vanished. Either I'd hallucinated the entire encounter, or something was very wrong with what I'd just witnessed. By the time I returned to Tower Falls Station, my hands had stopped shaking enough to complete the required paperwork. I parked Unit 12 in its designated spot and approached the building, keys ready to unlock the entrance. The door was already open. I stood on the threshold, running through my departure routine from earlier. I had secured the building, checked all entry points, set the radio to monitor mode. The door had definitely been locked, but now it hung slightly ajar, revealing darkness beyond. I pushed it open slowly, hand instinctively moving toward my radio. The main office was dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting long shadows across desks and filing cabinets. Someone was sitting at my workstation. A woman in hiking clothes, practical jacket, cargo pants, boots suitable for rough terrain. She looked up as I entered, offering a friendly smile that didn't reach her eyes. Evening, she said casually, as if sitting in a government building after hours was perfectly normal. Hope you don't mind me waiting inside. Gets cold out there after dark. Rule 2 surfaced immediately. Offer water to after-hours visitors, but do not answer their questions. I moved to the small kitchenette area and filled a paper cup from the water cooler. Water, I held out the cup. Thank you. She accepted it but didn't drink, just held it between her hands. I was hoping you could help me with some information about park procedures. I remained silent, standing near the entrance with my keys still in my hand. The woman's presence felt wrong. Not just the breaking and entering, but something about her demeanor. Too calm, too prepared, like she'd been expecting me. I'm curious about ranger protocols, she continued, studying my face carefully. Particularly how new employees are trained to handle unusual situations. The question hit too close to the strange rules I'd been given. I kept my expression neutral, following Rule 2 by offering no response. You seem like someone with military experience, she pressed. The way you carry yourself, how you scan rooms when you enter. What branch did you serve in? Still no response from me. She tilted her head, watching my reactions like a scientist observing a lab specimen. It's an interesting career change, she said, from combat zones to national parks. What made you choose this particular job, this particular location? The questions felt invasive, too personal for a random visitor. Normal tourists asked about trail conditions or wildlife viewing. They didn't probe into rangers' military backgrounds or career motivations. But Rule 2 was clear. No answers to questions. The woman waited for nearly a minute, then laughed. The sound made my skin crawl, not because it was loud or harsh, but because it carried no genuine humor. It was the kind of laugh someone might practice in front of a mirror, technically correct, but missing something essentially human. Well, she said, standing up from my desk, thanks for the water. She walked toward the door, passing close enough that I caught her scent. Not perfume or soap, but something clinical like antiseptic. At the threshold, she turned back. Have a good rest of your shift, she said, then stepped into the darkness and disappeared. I locked the door behind her, checking the deadbolt twice before moving to the window. The parking lot was empty except for my patrol vehicle. No car, no bicycle, no sign of how she'd arrived or how she planned to leave. The nearest road was 3 miles away, and the terrain between here and there was rough hiking at best. I settled at my desk to complete the patrol report, trying to focus on routine paperwork instead of the evening's encounters. The forms required documentation of mileage, fuel consumption, notable wildlife observations, and interactions with park visitors. I filled in the basics without mentioning running children or uninvited guests, following what seemed to be an unspoken protocol about keeping reports mundane. 30 minutes later, 3 distinct wolf howls echoed across the valley. The sound was unmistakable, deep, resonant calls that carried for miles in the mountain air. But these weren't the usual pack communications I'd heard during training videos. Each howl came from a different direction, perfectly spaced, almost like signals being passed between positions. Rule 5 flashed through my memory. If you hear 3 wolf howls in sequence, barricade yourself inside the nearest station until dawn. I moved quickly, checking every window latch and door lock. The station had been built for security with heavy frames and reinforced entry points. I wedged chairs under door handles and pulled filing cabinets in front of the main windows. Within 10 minutes, the building was as secure as I could make it. Then I settled in to wait. Strange sounds began almost immediately. Footsteps circling the building. Not the random pattern of wildlife, but deliberate packing like someone conducting surveillance. Scratching at windows, testing the latches I just secured. At one point, something heavy scraped across the roof, moving from one end to the other with mechanical precision. The sounds continued for hours, sometimes fading to nothing before, resuming with renewed intensity. I sat at my desk with the radio in my hand, following Rule 5 exactly, waiting for dawn to release me from whatever was prowling outside. I drove back to Mammoth Hot Springs as the first hints of sunrise crept over the mountains, my shift radio crackling with routine morning traffic. The night at Tower Falls Station felt like something from a fever dream. Wolf howls, prowling sounds, hours of waiting behind barricaded doors. But here I was heading to the Fishing Bridge Visitor Center for a scheduled meeting with Stephen Norwood, Senior Ranger, as if nothing unusual had happened. The employee schedule board in the main office had listed our 9:00 a.m. appointment without explanation. Summer had mentioned Stephen during my orientation, describing him as someone with 30-plus years of park experience who could help me understand local procedures. After 2 days of following bizarre rules and encountering things that didn't make sense, I welcomed the chance to talk with a veteran ranger who might provide some context. Fishing Bridge sat along the northern shore of Yellowstone Lake, a collection of buildings that served as both visitor services and administrative hub for the Lake District. I found Stephen's patrol vehicle in the parking lot, an older Ford Explorer with faded paint and equipment racks that suggested serious field use. Through the visitor center windows, I spotted a tall man in ranger uniform, examining wall displays with the unhurried attention of someone killing time. Stephen Norwood looked exactly like central casting would order for experienced park ranger. Graying blonde hair, weathered face, the kind of relaxed posture that came from decades of outdoor work. He turned as I entered, offering a firm handshake and the sort of genuine smile that immediately put people at ease. "Bruce, right, heard we got a new guy, Steve Norwood." His voice carried a slight Montana drawl. "How you settling in? Still learning the ropes, but getting there always takes time. Different animal than most federal jobs." He gestured toward the lake beyond the windows. "Coffee, got a fresh pot in the back office." We settled at a small table overlooking the water, steaming cups between us. Stephen had the manner of someone completely comfortable in his environment, the kind of ranger who tourists trusted instinctively and who could navigate bureaucracy as easily as wilderness trails. "Summer mentioned your military," he said, stirring his coffee. "Afghanistan, two-tour combat medic, good background for this work. Helps with the observation skills, staying calm under pressure." Stephen leaned back in his chair. "Bet you've seen some interesting wildlife already." "Bears, maybe." The question felt casual enough, but something in his tone made me wonder if he knew about my encounter with the backward-walking grizzly. "Some still learning the behavior patterns. They're fascinating animals, smarter than people give them credit for." Stephen sipped his coffee, watching my face. "You know, funny thing happened yesterday. Got a report about a missing kid from one of the camping areas. Little girl, maybe 8 years old, light blue jacket, jeans. Family said she wandered off from their campsite 3 nights ago." My throat tightened. The description matched the crying child exactly. The girl who'd run after my vehicle at impossible speed before vanishing into darkness. But Stephen delivered the information with the same casual tone he'd used to discuss coffee, as if missing children were routine administrative matters. 3 nights ago, I kept my voice neutral. "Yeah, Park Service has search and rescue protocols, of course. Coordinate with local law enforcement, helicopter sweeps if weather permits." Stephen shrugged. "These things usually work themselves out. Kids wander back to camp, turn up at visitor centers. Amazing how far they can walk when they get turned around." He drained his coffee cup and stood up. The conversation apparently finished. No mention of search teams, no urgency about a child missing for multiple days, no request for patrol units to maintain heightened awareness. The casual dismissal felt deeply wrong, but I couldn't articulate why without revealing my own encounter with the girl. "Anyway," Stephen continued, "main reason I wanted to meet was to go over some local patrol specifics. Summer mentioned you're handling solo routes. Lamar Valley yesterday, Tower Fall last night. Good sectors for getting your feet wet. Today you'll want to cover the Lake District, Fishing Bridge to Bridge Bay, then south toward West Thumb. Scenic route, decent traffic volume, good place to practice visitor interactions." Stephen handed me a route map with checkpoints marked in red ink. The patrol pattern looks straightforward, covering tourist areas and main road access points around Yellowstone Lake's northern shore. Normal ranger duties that had nothing to do with bizarre rules or impossible wildlife behavior. Radio check every 2 hours, standard reports, questions about anything, just call. Stephen headed toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Bruce, those protocols Summer gave you, they might seem unusual, but they're based on real experience, worth following exactly." He left me alone in the visitor center, staring at the lake through windows that reflected my own uncertain expression. Stephen's casual attitude toward the missing child bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Military training had drilled into me the importance of urgency when civilians were in danger, especially kids. But Stephen had discussed the situation like a routine paperwork issue, something that would work itself out without intervention. I spent the morning completing the assigned patrol route, checking campground access points, and stopping to assist tourists with directions and park information. Normal ranger work that felt almost therapeutic after the strangeness of my first 2 days. Families asked about fishing regulations. Photographers wanted advice about wildlife viewing locations. Hikers requested trail condition updates, routine interactions that reminded me why I'd wanted this job. But the image of the missing child kept surfacing. A little girl in a light blue jacket, exactly matching the figure I'd encountered on the dark road near Tower Fall. The coincidence felt too significant to ignore. Yet Rule 4 had been explicit about not investigating crying children under any circumstances. Either the rule was designed to prevent rangers from helping legitimate missing persons, or something else was happening that I didn't understand. Around 2:00 in the afternoon, I was driving the southern section of my patrol route when I spotted them. 3 people sat on a bench overlooking Yellowstone Lake, positioned about 50 yards from the road. 2 adults and what appeared to be a teenager, all facing the water with perfect stillness. Even from a distance, their posture seemed wrong, too rigid, too precisely arranged. They weren't talking, weren't moving, weren't engaging in any of the normal behaviors you'd expect from people enjoying a scenic view. As I approached in my patrol vehicle, the teenager slowly turned to look directly at me. The movement was mechanical, deliberate, like a security camera tracking a target. The teenager's face broke into a wide smile that didn't match their eyes, an expression that looked practiced rather than spontaneous. They maintained eye contact as I drove past, head turning to follow my vehicle's progress. Rule 6 surfaced immediately. If you encounter 3 or more people sitting together outdoors, drive away immediately. I pressed the accelerator, increasing speed without being obvious about it. In my rear-view mirror, I watched all 3 figures turn in unison to watch my departure. They moved with synchronized precision like dancers following choreography, maintaining their fixed positions on the bench while tracking my vehicle until the road curved out of sight. The encounter left me shaken in ways I couldn't explain. Normal tourists didn't sit in perfect stillness for extended periods. Normal people didn't smile at passing rangers with that kind of unsettling intensity, and normal families certainly didn't move with mechanical coordination, as if they were performing rather than simply existing. I completed the remainder of my patrol on autopilot, checking required stops, while my mind replayed the scene at the lake. The 3 figures had felt staged, arranged for my benefit, like actors hitting their marks. But that interpretation led to questions I wasn't ready to confront. Questions about who might be staging such encounters and why. Evening brought relief in the form of routine. I returned my patrol vehicle to the motor pool, filed the required paperwork, and headed to the employee cafeteria at Mammoth Hot Springs for dinner. The dining area was basic but functional, with a handful of tables and a serving line that offered simple meals for park staff. After 2 days of eating alone in my quarters, the prospect of company appealed to me. Johnny Scott was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, picking at a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. I'd met him briefly during orientation, another new ranger, maybe mid-20s, with the nervous energy of someone still adjusting to the job. He looked up as I approached with my tray, offering a tentative smile. "Mind if I sit?" "Please," Johnny gestured to the empty chair across from him. "How's the patrol work treating you?" I settled in with my dinner, grateful for normal conversation. Learning curve, but getting the hang of it. "You've been here 8 months now." Johnny's hands trembled slightly as he cut his meatloaf, still figuring things out. 8 months? That was longer than I'd expected for someone who still seemed so uncertain. Most jobs had learning periods measured in weeks, not the better part of a year. I studied Johnny's face more carefully, noticing the dark circles under his eyes and the way he kept glancing around the dining area as if checking for surveillance. "Same patrol routes?" I asked. "Similar. They rotate us through different sectors." Johnny lowered his voice, leaning closer across the table. "You've been following the rules Summer gave you." The question hit like cold water. Johnny's tone suggested he knew exactly what rules I'd received, which meant the protocols weren't unique to my assignment. "Yeah, they're unusual." "Unusual." Johnny laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. That's one way to put it. He pushed food around his plate without eating, eyes constantly moving to scan the other diners. The cafeteria held maybe a dozen people. All park employees engaged in normal dinner conversations, but Johnny watched them like potential threats, his nervousness infectious. "Johnny," I kept my voice low, "what's the real story with those protocols?" His fork paused halfway to his mouth. For a moment, his expression shifted from nervous to something approaching fear. "The rules keep us safe. That's what they told me when I started." "Safe from what?" That's Johnny set down his fork, hands shaking more noticeably now. "That's not the right question to ask. Questions lead to problems." The response felt rehearsed, like something he'd been told to say. But underneath the practiced words, I caught genuine fear. Johnny wasn't just nervous about the job. He was scared of something specific, something that made discussing the rules dangerous. "I've seen the bear," he whispered suddenly. "The one that walks backward. Same one multiple times. Always in different locations, always watching." My appetite disappeared. Johnny's encounter matched mine exactly down to the sense of being observed by the animal. But if we'd both seen the same bear exhibiting identical behavior in different areas of the park, the explanation couldn't be simple animal movement patterns. "How many times?" "Dozens, maybe more." Johnny's voice dropped even lower. "Started my 2nd week. Every few days there it is, backing down some hillside right where I can see it. Never gets closer, never does anything threatening, just watches." The pattern suggested surveillance rather than coincidence. A normal bear might cross a ranger's patrol route occasionally, but not with the frequency Johnny described, and the backward walking behavior was too distinctive to be natural, too specific to be accidental. "What about the other rules?" I pressed. Johnny glanced around the cafeteria again, then leaned even closer. "All of them. The crying child, the 3 howls, the visitors with questions, 8 months of following protocols that don't make sense, watching things that shouldn't exist. But you keep following them because questioning them leads to problems. Johnny's repetition of the phrase carried weight, as if he'd learned the lesson through bitter experience. Rangers who ask too many questions get transferred, reassigned to different parks, different districts, or they just leave. The word leave hung in the air between us, loaded with implications Johnny didn't seem willing to elaborate, but his fear was genuine, suggesting that whatever happened to questioning rangers was worse than simple job transfers. Johnny pushed back from the table, dinner barely touched. Bruce, listen to me. Tomorrow is going to be different. Different how? Something not covered by the rules, something new. Johnny's hands shook as he gathered his silverware. When it happens, remember what I told you about questions. He stood up abruptly, leaving his tray on the table and walking toward the exit with quick, nervous steps. I watched him go, noting how he checked over his shoulder before disappearing through the doorway. Whatever had Johnny scared, it was specific and immediate. I finished my dinner alone, turning over his warnings. 8 months of following bizarre protocols, multiple encounters with impossible wildlife behavior, and now a prediction that tomorrow would bring something new. Johnny's fear suggested the rules were just the beginning of whatever I'd gotten myself into. Outside the cafeteria windows, darkness was settling over the mountains. Somewhere in that wilderness, a little girl in a light blue jacket had been missing for 3 days. A child who matched exactly the figure I'd seen running at impossible speed behind my patrol vehicle. The 3 people by the lake had watched my departure with synchronized precision. Their mechanical movements suggesting careful coordination rather than coincidence. And tomorrow, according to Johnny's warning, something would happen that the rules didn't cover. I cleared my tray and headed back to my quarters, mind racing with questions I was apparently not supposed to ask. Whatever was happening at Yellowstone, it involved more than unusual wildlife behavior and strange patrol protocols. The fear in Johnny's voice had been real, immediate, personal. In my small apartment, I pulled out Summer's list of rules and read them again. 6 numbered items that had seemed bizarre during orientation now felt like warnings about specific threats. Rules designed not to test my compliance, but to protect me from encounters that other rangers had already experienced. But protect me from what? And why was tomorrow going to be different? I set my alarm for 6:30 and tried to push the questions aside. Johnny's warning about problems suggested that curiosity was dangerous here, that rangers who asked too many questions faced consequences worse than simple job loss. Tomorrow would bring answers whether I was ready for them or not. I woke before my alarm, Johnny's warning about today being different echoing in my mind. The employee quarters felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing close as I replayed our conversation from dinner. Questions lead to problems. Rangers who ask too many questions get transferred, reassigned, or just leave. The radio crackled to life at exactly 7 a.m. Summer's voice, cutting through the morning static with my assignment details. But something was off in her tone, a tightness I hadn't noticed before, like someone reading from a script while under pressure. Unit 12, you're assigned to Hayden Valley Patrol today. Southern Loop standard checkpoints. Radio contact every 2 hours, copy that. I kept my response neutral, but her delivery felt rehearsed in a way that made my skin crawl. Any specific concerns for the area? A pause longer than necessary. Negative, routine patrol. Maintain standard protocols. The emphasis on standard protocols carried weight, as if she was reminding me about the rules rather than simply confirming routine procedures. I signed off and gathered my gear. Johnny's words playing on repeat. Something not covered by the rules, something new. Hayden Valley spread across the Yellowstone River drainage like a massive meadow carved between forested ridges. During peak season, the area drew crowds for wildlife viewing. Bison herds, elk, the occasional wolf pack moving through the grassland. But this early in the morning, the landscape held an empty quality that should have been peaceful and instead felt watched. 20 minutes into my patrol, I spotted them. 3 people sat on a fallen log beside the road, positioned maybe 40 yards from the asphalt. 2 adults and what looked like a teenager, all facing away from the road toward the river. Their posture was identical to the group I'd seen yesterday at Yellowstone Lake. Too still, too precisely arranged, like mannequins positioned for a store display. As my vehicle approached, the teenager turned to look directly at me. The same mechanical movement, the same unsettling smile, the same feeling of being observed rather than simply noticed. But this couldn't be the same group. Hayden Valley was 30 miles from where I'd encountered them yesterday. I maintained speed, following Rule 6 by not stopping or engaging. In my rearview mirror, I watched all 3 figures turn in unison to track my departure. Their synchronized movement too coordinated to be natural family behavior. 15 minutes later, I found another group. These 3 sat on a bench near an interpretive sign about thermal features. Different people, I was certain of that, but arranged in the same configuration. 2 adults, 1 younger person, all facing away from the road until my patrol vehicle came into view. Then the mechanical turn, the practiced smile, the synchronized tracking of my progress. By noon, I'd counted 5 separate groups of 3, always positioned where I couldn't miss them, always responding with identical behavior, different faces, different ages, but the same unsettling choreography repeated throughout my patrol route. The pattern was too obvious to be coincidence, too coordinated to be natural tourist behavior. Someone was staging these encounters, positioning people along my patrol route, teaching them specific responses to my presence. But why, and how did they know exactly where I'd be driving? The answer that kept surfacing made my stomach clench. My radio communications were being monitored. My routes were being tracked. Every aspect of my patrol schedule was being shared with whoever was orchestrating these encounters. Canyon Village Ranger Station sat at the junction of several major park roads, a hub for tourist services and administrative operations. I pulled into the parking lot for my scheduled midday break, knotting 2 unfamiliar vehicles beside the building. A black SUV with government plates and a white sedan that looked more suited to city driving than park terrain. Inside the station, a woman in civilian clothes stood examining wall displays about park geology. She looked up as I entered, offering a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mid-40s, blonde hair cut in a severe bob, wearing a blazer that seemed impractical for park environments. "You must be Ranger Rue," she extended her hand, Dr. Juliet Thompson. "I'm a researcher studying wildlife behavior patterns in the park." Her handshake was firm, clinical, like a doctor greeting a patient, but something about her introduction felt off. Researchers typically worked through proper channels, coordinated with park administration, operated with official clearance rather than appearing unannounced at ranger stations. Wildlife behavior, I kept my tone neutral, specifically how environmental stresses affect animal adaptation. Dr. Thompson studied my face with the intensity of someone conducting a psychological evaluation. "I understand you've had some interesting encounters during your first week." The comment hit like ice water. I hadn't discussed my encounters with anyone except Johnny, and those conversations had been private. How did a wildlife researcher know about the backward walking bear, the crying child, the 3 howls at Towerfall? "Standard wildlife observations," I said carefully. "Of course." Her smile widened, but the expression felt practiced rather than genuine. "I'm particularly interested in your emotional responses to unusual situations, how you've been adapting to the protocols Summer provided." She knew about the rules, not just their existence, but their specific content and my compliance with them. The only way a civilian researcher could have that information was through access to confidential Park Service communications or direct briefings from my supervisors. "I follow all assigned protocols." "Excellent. Your military background suggests strong discipline and stress tolerance." Dr. Thompson consulted a small notebook. 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic, treated both military personnel and civilian casualties, discharged with psychological evaluations, noting hypervigilance and anxiety responses. My blood ran cold. Military service records were protected information, not accessible to park researchers conducting wildlife studies. The fact that she had specific details about my deployments and psychological evaluations meant she'd been granted security clearance far beyond what any legitimate scientist would need. "Those records are confidential. Your adaptation period is proceeding normally," she continued, ignoring my concern. "Compliance with unusual directives, appropriate stress responses, decision-making under pressure, all within expected parameters." Adaptation period. The phrase carried clinical weight, suggesting I was being evaluated rather than simply employed, but adaptation to what? And what were the expected parameters she was measuring? "What exactly are you studying, Doctor?" Thompson, her expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "Behavioral adaptation patterns. How individuals with specific psychological profiles respond to controlled environmental stresses." The words hit me like a physical blow. Controlled environmental stresses. The backward walking bear, the crying child, the 3 people sitting in perfect formation. All of it carefully orchestrated to produce specific stress responses. I wasn't being tested on park procedures. I was being used as a test subject. "I need to complete my patrol," I said, moving toward the door. "Of course, but Ranger Rue." Dr. Thompson's voice stopped me at the threshold. "Remember that questioning the parameters can interfere with the adaptation process. Cooperation ensures the best possible outcome." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. "Follow the protocols, accept the encounters. Don't ask questions about what was happening to me." The alternative was apparently the same fate that had befallen rangers who asked too many questions. I left the station without responding, my hands shaking as I unlocked my patrol vehicle. Dr. Thompson's clinical approach to my adaptation confirmed what Johnny's fear had suggested. We weren't rangers learning unusual local procedures. We were test subjects in some kind of psychological experiment, monitored and evaluated by researchers who had access to our most private medical information. The afternoon patrol passed in a haze of hypervigilance and growing paranoia. Every radio check with dispatch felt like surveillance. Every tourist I encountered could be another planted actor following a script. The landscape that had initially attracted me to this job now felt like a massive laboratory with me as the primary specimen under observation. Evening brought assignment to the Old Faithful area, where thermal features created an otherworldly landscape of geysers, hot springs, and steaming pools. Tourist crowds thinned after sunset, leaving the boardwalks and viewing areas largely empty, except for the occasional night photographer or late arriving visitor. I was completing documentation at the visitor center when my radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Base, this is Unit 14. I need immediate backup." Johnny's voice cut through the static, higher pitched than normal, edged with panic I'd never heard from him before. I grabbed the radio. "Unit 14. This is Unit 12. What's your location?" "Bruce." Johnny's relief was audible. "Thank God I'm being followed. The crying child. She's been tracking me for hours. Every time I try to leave my patrol route, she appears ahead of my vehicle." The transmission quality was poor, filled with interference that made his words hard to distinguish. But the fear in his voice was unmistakable. Genuine terror that made my chest tighten with recognition. "Where are you now, Johnny?" "South of Christ. She's running beside my truck again." "How is she keeping pace?" "I'm doing 40 mph and she's just running alongside like it's nothing." His description matched my own encounter exactly. The impossible speed, the effortless stride, the feeling of being hunted rather than simply encountered. But if Johnny was experiencing the same thing, it confirmed that these weren't random events. Someone was orchestrating identical encounters for multiple rangers. "Johnny, follow Protocol 6. Drive away immediately. I've been trying." Every time I change direction, she's already there waiting. Like she knows where I'm going before I do. The transmission dissolved into static for several seconds, then cleared briefly. "Bruce, listen to me. The rules aren't protection. They're part of whatever this is. Don't trust." The radio went dead. I tried raising him immediately. "Unit 14, respond." "Johnny, do you copy?" Nothing but static. I contacted dispatch, reporting the lost communication and requesting Johnny's last known location. Summer's response came back within minutes, providing coordinates that placed him near the Grand Prismatic Thermal Area, roughly 15 minutes from my position. I drove toward the location faster than park regulations allowed. Emergency lights activated, but no siren to avoid alarming tourists. Johnny's final words echoed in my mind. "The rules aren't protection. They're part of whatever this is." His warning had been cut short, but the implication was clear. The protocols weren't designed to keep us safe from threats. They were designed to make us compliant with whatever was being done to us. I found Johnny's patrol vehicle 40 minutes later, parked beside a thermal pool near the Grand Prismatic viewing area. Unit 14 sat empty with the driver's door hanging open, engine still running, headlights illuminating wisps of steam rising from superheated water. Johnny was nowhere to be seen. I approached the vehicle carefully, hand instinctively moving toward my radio. Johnny's equipment was still inside. Clipboard, water bottle, the duty belt he never removed during patrol. His radio sat in the center console, power light glowing green, but when I tried to raise him, the speaker only emitted static. The thermal pool beside his vehicle was roughly circular, maybe 20 ft across, with water that bubbled and steamed at temperatures hot enough to kill. Warning signs posted around the area emphasized the danger of thermal features, the fatal consequences of contact with the superheated water. I searched the immediate area, calling Johnny's name and checking behind trees and rock formations where he might have taken shelter. No response, no sign of struggle, no indication of where he'd gone or why he'd abandoned his vehicle. When I radioed the incident to dispatch, Summer's response felt wrong from the first word. "Copy, Unit 12 will initiate standard missing person procedures. Return to base immediately for debriefing. No questions about Johnny's last known activities. No urgency about a missing ranger in a dangerous area. No coordination with search and rescue teams or requests for additional units to assist with the search. Just clinical acknowledgement and instructions for me to leave the scene. Shouldn't we establish a perimeter, coordinate search teams? Negative. Return to base immediately. Ranger Scott's situation will be handled through appropriate channels. Ranger Scott's situation, not missing person emergency or potential medical incident, but a bureaucratic phrase that made Johnny sound like a paperwork problem rather than a human being in danger. I drove back toward Mammoth Hot Springs, with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white.